In Bob Worldbuilder's most recent Back to Basics video, it was a reminder to myself that I need to get back to my own Back to Basics series. So here we go. Yes and or no but are phrases that we hear a lot of times within the TTRPG community. But to newer or maybe less experienced GMs, these ideas can be really nebulous and oftentimes completely forgotten. So today, I want to talk about 4 actionable ways to stretch yourself as a game master, to keep your players thinking outside the box, and keep your games moving along at a smooth pace. I'm going to morph this idea of yes and no but into an actionable system I'm calling the GM Improv Toolbelt. Number 1, ask intent. Oftentimes, it can be a helpful habit to ask your players' intent or ask for clarifying questions when they want to do something strange, creative, or even risky. Don't assume that you know why when they're asking how far apart the beds in a room are or how high that balcony is. They may be considering something strange and outside the box, and this is your perfect moment as a GM to offer a creative solution and alley-oop their clever idea. Example, the thief asks, "Is there anywhere on the ceiling to tie a rope?" Then you might ask, maybe, what are you thinking? And then they say, "I want to snuff out the candles in the room, tie my rope to something on the ceiling, and dangle my cloak from it so the guards get distracted by this moving shape when they enter." Now you, knowing more than this player does, might be scratching your head and thinking, that's kind of strange, not really what I would have done, and you could totally miss out on an opportunity to collaborate with that player. Instead, now is your moment to ignore those notes and improv. You might answer, not only is there a chandelier in this room, but you could use the pillows from the bed to stuff the cloak and make a more believable distraction. You have just enabled that player's creativity and kept the pacing of your game moving along. Win-win. Which brings us to number 2, rewarding creativity. Don't just stop there. That was an excellent role-playing moment. Now it's time to capitalize on the creativity that your player has just presented to you. Try to always reward that player creativity when they choose to do something that's suboptimal or potentially even detrimental for the sake of role-playing. Or even just flat out for doing something other than just hitting it with a sword or spell or ability from your character sheet. The thief in this example could have easily just said, "I sit by the door with my daggers ready, waiting until the guard shows up to attack." Instead, they went out of their way to set up this elaborate ruse using mundane equipment and an interesting idea. So it's time to reward that creativity. Now, in this situation we just created, the simplest reward would be to simply grant that player or even the party a surprise round when the guards come searching the room. You could say that everyone gets advantage or some kind of boon to their stealth when the guards finally come looking for those players. Or you could go as far as allowing that thief to completely circumvent a potential combat situation by bamboozling the hapless guard, throwing a bag over their head, and preventing them from any attempts to cry out. Remember, folks, rewarding creativity is vital. If you take nothing else away from this video, remember this: what gets rewarded gets repeated. That is basic human nature. So let's move on to number 3, a more concrete way to reward your players' creativity, something I'm just going to simply call boons. So whenever I say boons, I'm going beyond any narrative implications into the actual mechanical values of the game you are playing. Whether that's things like a meta currency such as advantage or even luck tokens, a plus to an ability, or a bonus resource, utilizing boons is a good way to encourage innovative and interesting roleplay at your table. Now you can be preemptive with these boons and dangle the juicy steak of this reward in front of your players before they even make an action. Perhaps you hear one of your players whisper under their breath, "Maybe I can pull out the rug from under her and trip her before she goes and alerts the other guards." Now is the time to strike. Don't just wait around to see if that player goes through with it. Dangle that reward. Tell them, if you do this, then you're going to get advantage on that roll because she's not facing you and she doesn't see it coming. That's an excellent idea, and it's a good way to keep them from turning a bad situation into a worse one. So it'll help your game move along, and it makes them feel empowered by making a smart or clever choice. Or you can say, not only will it trip her and you get advantage on it, but she's going to take a d6 of damage for bludgeoning her own nose in. Adding an extra dice or doubling any numerical values is an easy way to implement a boon. Here's a real-life example of a boon that I used really early on at my table when I was still a pretty inexperienced GM and I didn't have any idea what I was doing. In the first game that I ever ran, our party was facing down the threat of a black dragon. Our humble bard asked, "Are there any stalactites on the roof to this cave where the dragon is resting?" Now I thought, that's kind of a strange question, but I went with it. I had a sneaking suspicion that he was about to do something clever or crafty, so I simply said, "Yes, there are tons of stalactites on the roof. What do you want to do?" So then a smile broadened on his face, and he said, "I want to aim my shatter spell at the stalactites above the dragon." I loved this idea. So I said, "Yes, you can do that, absolutely." Now, for those of you who don't know, this was a 5th edition game, and Shatter deals 3d8 thunder damage to a foe, or half on a save. Now, I could have simply said, sure, you shatter some of the stalactites, and maybe some of them fall and hit the dragon, had him roll the damage for that spell, and called it a day. But I hadn't really seen a lot of this behavior from my players yet, and I wanted to reward this clever combination of environment and spell use. So instead I said, "The roof shatters with explosive force, sending stalactites flying with missile-like velocity. Roll 6d6. This dragon was not expecting such brash use of your spell. They get no save." Now you may think, wow, doubling the spell's damage is a huge boon, and I would simply stop there. However, I know this player well, and they have a magical tendency to roll low on their dice. So I said, not only that, but some of the stalactites pierce the dragon's wings, giving it difficulty with flying and halving its speed. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Wow, Jordan, that's a lot of potency for a single spell use and a little bit of creativity. But here's the thing, folks. Anyone can strategically cast a fireball at a group of goblins, but it takes a special kind of player to say, "I want to cast the fireball at their tents, setting their camp ablaze and sowing chaos among the ranks." If you really want to get your players to start thinking outside the box again and stop running into every fight with hammers, smashing whatever's in their way, and reignite that sense of wonder they had when they first started playing role-playing games, then reward creativity with mechanical or narrative values. Because let's face it, folks, a lot of people look down at their character sheet and all they see is hammers. And when all you have is hammers, every problem looks like a nail. And just to really hammer this point in, I often hear things said in this hobby like, "I just love having new players at my table. They're always so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and the world is their oyster. They're full of clever ideas that aren't tied to their character sheet." They're the ones always coming up with these creative ideas because they're not bound by the mechanics of the games they're playing yet. They're thinking as their characters would. They're thinking within the confines of the world they are in. Folks, this is the point of rewarding creativity. Maybe your players have stopped thinking in ways other than optimal choices because you have beat the creativity out of them by always saying no. Or even worse, no and. Perhaps you've had years of punishing them for trying to be creative at all and coming up with clever outside-the-box thinking, when really, they could have just went in, used a couple of smites, and tried to hit that guy in the face with a big hammer. But before we get too off course here, let's go back and give just a few more examples of mechanical value ways to introduce boons. Maybe someone spends an entire turn getting height on a group of foes, grabbing their warhammer, jumping off, and slamming it into this group of orcs with savage momentum. How boring would it be if after that description you just said, "Okay, you get advantage on your attack." Perhaps instead, if they hit, they roll twice on the warhammer's damage and take the better, and maybe even double their strength modifier. Or they automatically hit that orc stuck in the middle of the group. Or maybe they deal half damage to all the orcs in the vicinity. And better yet, they get all 3 of those things. Okay, so let's pull back a bit and not get too out of hand with the idea of boons. They don't always have to be these extraordinary feats or huge moments. They can be simple little things that you give the player. A dwarf with a torch strapped to her shield might bash a goblin in the face with it, blinding him for a turn, or dealing 1d4 damage until he puts the fire out. Any boon at all, even a small one, is better than simply saying no, shutting down that player's creativity, and forcing them back into rote routines and character sheet thinking. Okay, number 4, I know a guy. Just like flashbacks in Blades in the Dark, I know a guy is a rule that allows players to press on in a situation without having to feel like they're totally prepared for every conceivable outcome. Now, we've all had that game where your players are sitting at a door arguing about the approach to a situation for a literal, real hour's worth of time, only to have them burst in and then one small detail changed everything. If you feel one of these moments coming on, it's time to interject with the I know a guy rule. Just stating this idea out loud ensures your players that you're not going to punish them for pressing on with a sort of half-baked idea. If there's a cost to these flashbacks, then maybe you just say, okay, everybody, your first one is a freebie. If something comes up, just tell me why you were prepared for it, and we'll make a roll. If it's not something too crazy or risky, it simply happens. Otherwise, we'll see what happens. Or you could say you can spend something like gold or another resource to just automatically have had that rope you needed or that special item for this corner case scenario. And if they do end up spending a resource, maybe like inspiration or a luck coin, you can just say, okay, yeah, that thing happens. You did that earlier. You were prepared. Now, if you are worried about your players potentially abusing the I know a guy rule, then you can always have it tied to either a meta currency or some other cost such as health or actual money in the game. Let's just call it a D4 if you fail. So let's go ahead with an example of this. Let's say the party has to sneak into an exclusive noble gala and steal the MacGuffin from under the nose of the local baron. They attempt to use the servants' entrance, but are caught by a single patrolling guard. One of the players says, hey, I think I know that guy. Maybe they propose a scene and say, you know what, I actually spoke to that guy last night at the tavern. They spend a fate point and say, I bought him a few extra ales, loosened his lips, and got some insider information from him. Now, you could simply have the player eat the cost in coins, saying that he bribed the guard with a few extra drinks of ale. Or you could go a different route and say, you tried to convince the guard that the Baron was a scoundrel. Go ahead and make me a persuasion test. And while we're in this flashback situation, we can actually fall back on the other three rules from earlier in this video. Ask intent, reward creativity, and grant boons. They can intertwine with this idea of, I know a guy. Because ultimately, this is allowing two other things to happen in secret. The pacing and the momentum of the game to keep carrying forward and allowing the creativity of your players to have agency within the world they're in. Because now look, even if they fail this roll, it's going to create an entirely new, interesting situation that keeps the game moving along. The guard now has a connection with that player character, and maybe he looks at him and says, ah, it's you, the silver-tongued bootlicker from last night. I should ring this bell and alert everyone just for you showing your face around here. Because now, using the I know a guy rule, we've allowed the situation to move forward in a new and interesting way. You may have just broke up the standard operating procedures and turned this into a social encounter instead of straight into a combat one. Alright folks, well I'm running out of time, so that's it for me today. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and you find it actionable in your own games. Just remember the 4 rules of the GM Improv Toolbelt. Ask intent, reward creativity, grant boons, and provide outs using I know a guy. Thanks for listening. I just wanted to provide more actionable, useful tips at the table for new GMs or old GMs alike and continue the path to GMuary. Hello, Future Jorban here. I'm in the editing room, and I always forget to mention in my main videos that I've been doing these live AMA style streams where I ramble on about a TTRPG topic for about 15 minutes, and then I play a game like Card Hunter, which is something sort of D&D adjacent. So I've been doing that on Thursdays at about 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. Make sure to look out for those and join me if you want to connect in that way. And I may start using Twitch in the future to play more non-D&D style video games in a less structured format, more casual kind of way. So check out the Twitch and pay attention for the AMAs on Thursdays at 7:30. Peace. Like I've been harping on for weeks now, make sure to check out the description below and either join the Discord or the Patreon, where we're going to be talking about things like our Shadow Dark West Marches game. And don't forget to like, subscribe, all that kind of jazz. And that's really it. Thanks for watching. As always, make mistakes, choose chaos, and most importantly, have fun. Back to basics, let's get down to brass tacks and start rolling the dice. We need some practical facts, no more theory crafting or lofty abstracts. I need a concrete solution, a foregone conclusion. Back to basics. We're back to basics. We're back to basics. We're back to basics.